When I was reading over the scriptures for this Sunday during the week, I found it really hard to find a consistent thread that would link them. They seemed each in their own way to give me a good lesson, a good teaching, a nice thought. But to try to link them together, to find a common thread woven through them was difficult. I reread them again, and there were some kinds of things that happened. Because the first reading from the beginning of the scriptures, Genesis, talked about creation, especially the creation of all of us, men and women. And then the second reading, Paul, he is writing to the people, the Hebrews. And in there, he is saying that God, Christ, became one with us and indeed was pleased to call us brothers and sisters, so identifying with us. And then the final, the gospel you heard Deacon John just proclaim, spoke about the unity that was to mark any marriage. And then the ending of that, surprisingly tacked on, is a story about children and how we should adopt the attitude of children in our love for others and our dependence on our God and our mutual respect for each other. So going through them again, what do you see? What became a little clearer to me was the idea that in these readings is an outline, a suggestion. It is what God expects in our relationships with one another, what God expects in the way we treat one another. And that gave me an insight because I remembered so many conversations I've had with parishioners who often say to me, I don't know what to do. I'm having a really difficult time. I am struggling with my patience with this one. Now that can be a spouse, a friend, a co-worker, someone on the street, someone I'm acquainted with. I'm having a hard time, and I find growing within me a resentment and even showing anger toward them. And then we began to talk in these conversations, not so much about the individual, but I posed the question first, what do you think this individual expects of you? And what are you expecting of this individual? Now that changes the conversation because often my anger with people has less to do with them or me and much more about our expectations of each other. So I would suggest these readings give us a hint. And if your relationships between one another are frayed or broken, are somehow strained and angry, maybe it is because your expectations do not mirror those of God. One of them might be is my expectations are very unrealistic, unreasonable for this person this time. Think for it in its most obvious form with children. I will not expect children to respond, to react, to be responsible as I would an adult. So I don't put on children an expectation they cannot meet, even though the expectation later in their life will be fine, desirable, and indeed normal. But for this person, at this time, they cannot follow that expectation. Now put that with your own relationships with adults. There are some adults who at this point in their life cannot do a normal thing or cannot meet an expectation I place upon them. And I get so frustrated because they can't. But maybe I need to take a step back and recognize what I'm asking is unreasonable. It could be also the other way around. I am equally frustrated because they are placing demands on me, expectations on me that I can't meet. I can't do all of this. It's impossible for me to do all of the things you expect, and I'm angry with you. It frays our relationship, it pulls us apart because the expectations at this time are unreasonable. That may be the first lesson. Look and see in your relationships, are those placed upon you or those you place on others unrealistic at this time? But there seems to be a second one. And that is, if my expectations are not at all what God expects. They are not God's expectations of how I should act. They're more my well, my demands, my agendas. Look again at that first reading, Genesis. It says there, it is not good that we are alone. We know that from psychology. We know that better from experience. One of the worst things we can do is isolate people. Why in prisons do they say solitary confinement as an added punishment to someone? Even with children, why do we say it's a timeout, go in the corner, get away? That isolation is very understandable, because what it does is it forces me to realize how much I value the relationship, how much I want to get back into the relationship. So I'm going to change my expectations. In that first reading, you and I have to look and say, the Lord is telling me here, it is not good for us to be alone, separate. And what often I have done is I have not really respected this sense in which we could be one. And I have placed and I have done more demands. In fact, what I have done is I have said, I want you indeed to see me and all I need, but I will not recognize always or look and see what you need. In other words, my expectations have become self-centeredness. They become demands, not expectations. I have pushed you away. Or you may have noticed some people have just moved away from you. Maybe it's because you haven't done what this first reading said. Maybe I haven't understood that it is not good that I push people away, that I make demands that are unrealistic, that I indeed separate myself from others, that I see my needs and I ignore yours. That's not God's expectation. I need to adjust mine if that's what's happening, because they are demands, not expectations. They are expressions of self-centeredness, not one of unity. And then go to the second reading. It's Paul. He's talking to the Hebrews. There he is saying, I am one like you, and he even calls us brothers and sisters. So it is a reminder to you and me that there should be about us that same sense of humility, that I am not different than another. I am indeed recognizing you are a brother or a sister, but even more, you are a son. You are a daughter of the Lord. And in that, I should begin to see a mutuality. I should see there a sense in which we are growing together. But often what I do in my relationship is I try to control it, don't I? I try to get you to do what I want you to do. I try to manipulate it. Oh, I don't like to admit it. Now, I see that so clearly in others, don't I? When they're trying to get me to do something I may not want to do or feel is appropriate to do. But I have a hard time seeing it in myself. But I do it. I control it. I'm too proud to admit it. I need to be more humble in this relationship. Less controlling. Less trying to get its outcome for my benefit. I have to look and see that this isn't an expectation of God. This is a control of mine. I'm trying to indeed manipulate you. And then finally, maybe my expectations are off-kilter because I have forgotten what that gospel said. The Lord is telling the disciples what should mark a marriage is that sense of unity. But maybe breaking it down, what should mark it is a single focus, that I have as the beloved the source of my love. And I look and say, you are the reason I love. You are the reason I have life today, because I love you and you give me life. And I have a mutuality. We share in this relationship, both in responsibility as in love. And once you lose that focus and that mutuality, whether it is in a marriage or in a deep friendship or companionship, then I already have lost the goodness of that relationship. Losing its focus puts it all on me. Losing that mutuality makes you serve me. And that destroys the relationship, doesn't it? It's not expectation then. When I have lost the focus or I have abandoned the mutuality and made it all about me, what happens is then I become the master and you the servant. And that's how I expect it. I expect you to serve me. That's how it should be. But that's not what this reading says. This is not God's expectation. And in short, at the end, he tells us, you should be like children. Children who recognize their need of one another. Children who respond in great love. And they will give away whatever they have. Have you ever given a child young a piece of paper, some crayons, and soon they will draw a picture? Do they keep that picture and put it on their wall? They give it to you. Put it on the refrigerator. Hang it up. They will give away their love. No wonder the Lord says, you should look at these children. And instead of trying to manipulate, trying to control, trying to determine and to lose focus, recognize your love always is to be out-centered, looking at the other. That's the expectations of the Lord in good, healthy relationships. So maybe you need to look at the scriptures again and see very clearly where you need to change the expectations that are off bounds, unreasonable. Or maybe you need to curb the relationships differently with expectations that are of God, not of your own. See if your expectations are not so much expectations, but demands or expressions of control or of lack of focus. Look today and see how these readings could help us revive or enliven relationships to be more in line with God's expectations.